And I'd like to give a big welcome to the Bleeding Birdie podcast, Mitch Tischler of NBC Sports Washington. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
That's awesome. We appreciate you being here. I know you're a busy man, so we're going to try not to keep you too long. A couple things kind of hit today. The first thing everybody's talking about is the Alex Smith article in GQ magazine. That was some kind of I guess powerful quotes. I haven't read the whole thing, just what's out on Twitter. Kind of want to get your thoughts on that to start off.
Yeah, I mean, I went through and read the GQ article. Obviously, there's a lot there, and most of it was about his rehab and coming back. But certainly there was the talk about whether Washington wanted, and Ron Rivera probably wanted him to come back and be a member of the Burgundy and Gold. And I think, from Alex's perspective, he didn't necessarily feel the love. And to be honest, I think all of us can be honest that we were all surprised that Alex came back and was able to play. I mean,
Sure.
All off season long, as he kept hitting each milestone, there was more and more leading towards him being a member of this team. But until we all saw him hit the field, I don't think anyone was really convinced that he was ever going to play football again. So, to have a veteran quarterback of Alex's stature kind of come out of the blue, no matter how much you thought that he was taking the correct steps, come out of the blue and be ready to be able to play and contribute, I think was a surprise to everybody. Now, you read it the other direction, and clearly I think that, you can see where Alex is probably not going to be a member of this organization next year, and there's a separation of you can appreciate everything that he's been through to get to this point and understand that he's not a $20 million a year quarterback anymore and would be a hindrance to this team moving forward if they kept him around and he played under that $20 million a year tag. And so, or not tag, but contract. So I think that, you can appreciate everything Alex has been through, and it's an incredible story, while also understanding that, listen, he's under the current constructs of his deal. He's not going to, it doesn't make sense for him to be a member of this team.
Well, Mitch, what I think is interesting here too is everyone looked at this situation as being a Cinderella story. Obviously with 17 surgeries plus, no one's expecting him to come out of the woodworks and even perform the way that he did, coming out. But what's your take on when you read and you see him say they, quote, they didn't want me? That seems to hit really hard, and especially in the Twitterverse when you're reading everyone's reactions, they didn't want me. Who do you think they is he referring to?
I think that for Washington football fans, you can read this in only a good way. You can be frustrated that, quote unquote, they didn't want him, but we all know how close Dan Snyder and Alex Smith became over the last 2 years, basically, as he was rehabbing. You saw him in the owner's box all the time. So clearly the owner would have wanted him back because they've become pretty tight. But they not wanting him is probably the Ron Rivera, Scott Turner collection of folks. But the fact that they, embraced him and made the most of having him on this team and in this organization, while also not feeling compelled necessarily long-term to keep him, I think shows kind of the delineation that we haven't seen in years past between ownership and coaching. And I think that's I look at it as a good thing, in that Ron is able to really, voice his opinion without the worry of what's going to happen from ownership or above him. And that's been what's missing, in my opinion, in the front office side of things in this organization for the better part of 2 decades.
Yeah, it struck me funny. We hear so little of what's really going on in that front office, and what we heard all this off season, ever since Ron came here, that don't count out Alex. He always stated that in every one of his, whenever quarterback talk came up, he was, hey, there's Alex too. Don't count out Alex. So to me, when I heard those today, it struck me weird. Like, where was this coming from? But I mean, I can totally understand it and I totally get it. It struck me in a kind of a weird way, because we heard Ron all summer long, don't count out Alex. Like there was a chance. And then this stuff comes out. That's kind of,
here's the thing, in a vacuum, not Washington football related, but just if you have a football team with a brand new head coach that is looking at a 5-year deal and moving everything forward, do you want a $24 million 17 surgery boat anchor, being added to your team. Like, I understand why Ron might not have wanted him to be there. Now, to me, the biggest thing that I always look at with Alex is just his leadership and his intangibles. He's the only quarterback that's been able to lead this team to a winning record, heck, in basically 2 decades. So, I mean, you can dismiss that 6-3 start that he before the leg injury, but it's the same team that
Sure.
tanked down the end and was terrible, beyond that. So I think that, Alex brings a lot to the table. But if I'm a brand new head coach and I'm starting with a new franchise and looking at this as a multi-year, rebuild, which Ron Rivera talked about, I don't know that I would consider having a 36-year-old quarterback that's coming off of that sort of leg injury being an asset to necessarily have around the team. Now, did Ron and Scott Turner and Ken Zampese and that entire offensive side of the football make the best of it? Absolutely. And they gave him, they did everything they could to make it the best situation for him and the best situation for the team. And now you can look at it at the end of the season. They had a great year. They won the division. They went to the playoffs. And now you're moving forward, and it's time to amicably split and, send off Alex the way that Alex deserves to be sent off. And that is giving him an opportunity to sign somewhere where he's going to have an opportunity to play, where the team is going to seek him out and want his veteran leadership and his abilities. And he can hopefully find a winner. And, his Cinderella story can continue elsewhere.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a great point. I just, when I look at the whole thing and I read the article, I mean, you have different ways that you can, look at it. And I've seen both arguments, currently on Twitter, and it's real interesting to read the different point of view. And I think ultimately, when you look at Alex and the type of professional that he is, you want to think that this was a situation where he is taking the high road. He was just explaining the truth behind what was happening. And I mean, ultimately, even if you looked at it at the negative side, my opinion is when you look at Ron and the situation, no coaches coming in really enjoy inheriting quarterbacks. We all know that the history is they like to bring their own. And then when you take a look at Ron and you see that he inherited the back end of a 17 surgery recovery, I'm sure that there was a part of him that was, basically saying, I don't want to be responsible for sending this guy in and possibly, finishing off his career. I mean, look at the hell that Shanahan got from RG3, from all of us, looking back at that situation. So, Ron is also, I think, looking to maybe protect his character as well in his decision-making in that process. I mean, would you agree with that? I guess, Mitch, what I'm trying to understand about this article is what was Alex's end game here, in your opinion?
I believe his end game, to me, is to kind of paint the picture that whenever the Washington football team decides to cut him or restructure his contract or whatever the wording is that the team and Alex decide on, that it doesn't look like it's the team that's cutting bait and Alex is all of a sudden just left floating in the wind. I think he's just starting to create that narrative where, and it's entirely understandable, but certainly if Washington is to outright cut him, next week, 2 weeks from now, whenever it may be, there might be a public perception that, oh, Ron Rivera and this coaching staff and this training staff all watched him rehab and they don't think he's good enough to come back. Man, he can't play in this league anymore. So I think it's a little bit of a, create a narrative type situation. But, I think that Alex will get I think he should get another opportunity somewhere. I'm just not entirely sure that he will.
Yeah.
No, I agree 100%. Moving on to other article that came out. AJ Perez of the Front Office Sports. It was an article on Jeff Bezos and his interest in buying an NFL team. There was, I guess, interest in the Washington football team. But in that article, it had stated that from court documents, I guess it was obtained yesterday, that Allen had many conversations with John Moeg, which is the firm that is trying to sell the shares for Fred Smith and Dwight Schrute, that they had 87 phone calls, 22 hours of conversation, tons of emails, and tons of texts that were, quote, proved and focused on the negative publicity directed towards Dan Snyder. What are your thoughts on that?
the entire thing is an entirely messy situation.
Sure it is.
And you're looking at a group of minority owners who originally wanted to buy out the majority owner and
Yeah.
probably, if still given the chance, would force him out. If they could force him out, would do so and take over the, entire ownership of the team. So you're in a kind of a no-win situation where if you're a fan of this team and this franchise, you want this whole thing to just go away. It's bad PR no matter which way it goes. There's no ending to this story that ends with flowers and roses and everyone being happy. And so along the way, there are going to be these hit pieces, which I'm going to call them. And you've seen it, in articles about Dan Snyder. You've seen it in discussions about the way the minority ownership group is trying to go after things. It got traced back to a social media company that's in India, and some connection to the building that was being rented by one of the minority owners. There's so many twists and turns and loops and everything that goes with it. The only thing that I feel about this whole thing is that as somebody who covers the team and from the fans' perspective and honestly the media's perspective, I want this thing to come to a conclusion as quick as humanly possible. Because it's all bad news all the time. There's nothing that's going to come from the sale of this 40% minority group that's going to reinvigorate the fan base or have you excited about what's happening in Ashburn. What's going to be that is going to be the draft, offseason signings, signing Brandon Sheriff, getting back to OTAs, Ron Rivera and Jason Wright, talking about the rebrand and how they're going to make the fan experience better and all those things. Ownership should be a thing that is quiet, away from fans. The best owners are the quiet owners that you don't even think about. They're like a referee in a football game. You want them there. You just don't want to think about them or have them be a part of it.
The plot just keeps thickening, and for Bruce Allen now to be involved, it's just when will it end, man? When will it end?
I think that the Beth Mullins investigation from the NFL will go a long way in kind of putting an end to things. If they come out of that investigation and Dan Snyder is clear of any of these allegations that have been kind of tossed around by the minority owners and basically have been brought to light by them. If he's cleared by him, then I think this will all go away pretty quickly and the minority owners will be forced to sell at whatever number they can get. If it comes back and is ugly for the owner, then you might see a situation where the NFL steps in and, tries to reallocate that ownership group. It's going to really all kind of, that crux is going to be the NFL investigation. And hopefully it comes to a conclusion quickly, which I know there's been hints that it would be, hopefully before the draft. So we'll hopefully have some answers coming soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
Excellent. Mitch, I want to hot topics. I definitely want to talk quarterback, but I don't want to go quarterback like we've been doing. I actually, I recognize that you recently got to talk with Taylor Heineke. That's correct, right? Yeah. And I read the article. I know that you guys definitely went down memory lane with a cool college experience that he went through. It seems like Taylor has these types of games that he can recall, which they're just unbelievable moments. So when you take the situation, when you talk to him and you take the playoff situation, we fans don't really know a lot about Taylor Heineke. What was your experience when you were talking to him? How did you feel that he approached your guys' conversation?
I think he approached the conversation exactly how I would expect a guy who's been through the XFL and been cut by NFL teams and been signed with 5-6 weeks left in the season, whatever it may be. He was relaxed. He had just signed a new contract for the first time in his career since he left Old Dominion University. He knows where his feet are going to be next year. And if you guys listen to Ron Rivera as closely as as we do, one of Ron's favorite sayings is "Be where your feet are." He's a guy who is finally in a situation where he can be comfortable and knows what's going to be expected of him and can kind of start working towards that end goal of being the week one starter. He came out and performed so admirably against Tampa Bay with very little time in this offense, very little time creating any sort of cohesion with his receivers and his offensive line and his running backs, heck, even his coaches. He's got an entire offseason now to learn the playbook inside and out, be able to be, the genius that every quarterback is asked to be. And I think that's a great situation for him to blossom. And, we have a taste of how good he can play. Let's hope that that's who he is. Let's hope this isn't a Colt Brennan experience where he comes in a preseason game, lights it up and then all of a sudden disappears and is, obviously not a starting quarterback. So I think that the optimism from the Washington fan base is spectacular and should be there because there hasn't been, real gaudy quarterback play like we saw Taylor Heineke play, probably a couple Kirk instances, a couple RG3 instances, but before that, it's been a really long time. So there's a lot to be excited about with him. I'm just not ready to hand over the reins to him and say, you're my week 1 starter, because he did it for 5 quarters.
Yeah, that was exactly was going to be my next question is, a lot of people talk about the games that he did start in and that he was hurt. So there's a lot of questions is, can he even stay, healthy for now 17 games, a season? And I guess it would be unfair to ask you, if he could, because like you said, 5 quarters. And I think that that's the biggest struggle with us fans is we love the story behind Taylor, with that playoff game and against Tom Brady. We love that we probably were a team that played Tampa the hardest through this season. And we just haven't seen success like that from a quarterback, at all. But, I guess the big questions that we have is we're not ready to hand, but there are some people that are. There are some people that say that this guy is it. I mean, do you think that if he were to win the QB1, I do believe that all fans would jump on board in this case, and it would not be split because of his story and success. But do you think he can last? Do you think that he's going to make it?
So there are a couple questions in there. The first one is
sorry about that.
Durability. That's all right. The first one's the durability, which is certainly a question. The one thing I go back to is, the game against Tampa, he dislocated his left shoulder. He ran off the field and got it x-rayed, I believe, and came back out and finished the game. In talking to him after the game, he said that he would have been available to play the next week had Washington been in, a divisional round playoff game at that point. Yeah. So you certainly have that portion of it. His toughness, I don't think you can question. Part of the way that he played in that Tampa game was he played balls to the wall. You were in a playoff game it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to start a playoff game as your first start, in the NFL. So I think that he really went for it. He really, really went for it. If Taylor goes through a legit competition, which I have no doubt Ron is going to hold this year, unless they end up bringing in the Derek Carr, Deshaun Watson, Russ Wilson group of quarterbacks, anybody else under the sun, I want a true competition out of them. And Ron said it after the season that he may have made a mistake not having a competition last offseason and handing the reins to Dwayne Haskins without forcing him to earn it. So I believe Ron really has learned from that scenario and is going to have a true competition, because I don't think at the end of the day, Washington's going to end up landing one of those superstar quarterbacks. So even if it's that Marcus Mariota, Ryan Fitzpatrick, whatever that kind of middle tier of quarterback is, they're going to be in a competition with, certainly right now, Taylor Heineke, probably Kyle Allen as well, and a rookie. I believe they'll end up picking one in the draft as well. So if Taylor's the one that comes out smelling like roses after a true training camp competition, there's no question that Washington fans should throw all of their support behind him, because he will have jumped every hurdle that was put in front of him, including the 37,000-foot hurdle of starting a playoff game for your first, for your first start. So I think that if he comes out on the other end of it and is the guy that impresses the coaches the most, plays the best, man, I would be super excited for Heineke Mania to hit Washington.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we all would. I think we all we're a lot of us are doubting it now, but I think in the end, if he were to win the position, absolutely 100% Heineke Mania all around.
Well, I think real quick, I think that's a little bit the difference between kind of the fans and the media, is that the fans can sit there and yell, I want Taylor Heineke. I want Taylor Heineke. He should be the starter. He's the best. He's the best guy. Whereas the media recognizes that if he's anointed the starter without having to go through a competition, without having to, earn the job, which is really what it is, then can you really be sure that he's the best quarterback? So that's why I think you see a lot of the media talking about all these free agent quarterbacks and trades and all these different scenarios, because you need to bring in somebody that's going to give him legit competition, somebody that if he beats, you have a benchmark as to how good he can be.
Yeah. And as far as the fans go. It seems like every single day they're talking or hyping up a different quarterback. There was Watson, Stafford, Carr, Mariota, Darnold, even the other day Fitzpatrick, and now today it's Cam Newton. I mean, I think we've been so deprived of a quarterback for such a long time. We're just trying to grasp at anything, and where do we go from here? Do you think that they're content with going with Heineke or Allen this season?
No.
Yeah,
I think that they're content with having those two compete. And I've said a couple of times that I don't know how fans feel about this, but I don't think that Kyle Allen is going to be a member of the Washington football team next year.
I said that.
I think that he's going to get a Dwayne Haskins type, the Steelers deal that Dwayne Haskins got. He's going to get a similar contract here with Washington. They're going to bring in another veteran. They're going to have a rookie. And I think they're going to have 4 folks competing for a role on this team. That's obviously assuming that Kyle Allen is healthy and able to be a part of this competition. But I think that's why there's all this talk about all these different quarterbacks. Washington's been in the quarterback abyss for 30 years, 30 years.
We know.
I mean, there hasn't been a franchise guy here since Mark Griffin. Like, I don't know who you want to.
Heisman probably like
Joe
a true
Theismann,
franchise.
Whoever that guy is. Yeah. And so that's why all these names are so exciting for everybody, because most of these guys are guys that have proven something in the league. They've proven to be competent NFL quarterbacks, and it's been too long with incompetent quarterback play here in Washington. So for me, when I see all these different names that are floating around, they're really, Cam Newton is really one of kind of 3 guys that I don't want to see in Washington, and that's
I'm right there with you,
Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jameis and Fitzpatrick. I think Jameis is just a young version of Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Right.
Both guys will throw the ball downfield and get a bunch of yards, but turn the ball over too much. And I think Cam is too limited in this day and age of the NFL in what he does. And I think that the type of offense that you have to design with Cam, I think, will hurt Antonio Gibson's growth and Terry McLaurin's growth. They might have better numbers next year, but I don't believe that they'll progress the way that you want. 2nd and 3rd year stars, soon to be stars, breakout potential stars, whatever the wording you want to use for those guys. You want to see them progress in Scott Turner's offense the way that he kind of has it designed, and not have to mold it for a quarterback that doesn't have the same abilities that he did when he played with Ron, whatever it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I would, I'm not as low on Fitzpatrick. I think if you can't get, like a Mariota or someone like that, I think Fitzpatrick would be a good 1-year stopgap, or at least to come in here and battle Heineke, because he did. He had. I thought he played well. I know he's shaking his head over there. He doesn't agree with me, but
I agree with Mitch.
To me, I think it would be a stopgap. At least to come to compete. But I am not on the Cam Newton train. I started seeing the decline when he was in Carolina, but it's crazy, man. It's just every day it's a different quarterback that people are talking about. So let's move to the draft.
My Fitzpatrick thing is just the turnovers. I think this is a team that is built with their defense to win games as long as the offense doesn't lose it for them.
No, he does.
While Fitzpatrick more than likely isn't going to go out and win you games, he certainly can lose you games by turning it over. I would much rather go with what's that?
He's a broke Brett Favre.
I would much rather go with a super boring, and people already hate this and are snoozing on it. I would much rather have Tyrod Taylor here, who's not going to throw for 5,000 yards. Yeah. He also isn't going to turn the ball over. So he's going to give you a chance to win week in, week out, especially with as good as that defense is.
Yeah, I'd rather have Taylor than Newton, that's for sure. Moving to the draft, what would you like to do at 19? Would you want to go on the line, the offensive line? Would you like to go linebacker, wide receiver? What do you want to see us do with the 19th pick?
I mean, you're going to hate this answer because it's a boring answer, but I want them to take the best player available.
Yeah,
I think we've seen over the years with the way that they've built that defensive line, where you keep, you strengthen a strength. It's okay to do that if you're picking a difference maker of a player. And there's no position on this team outside of defensive line where you have everything, where you have everything that you need out of that player. So yes, they need a left tackle. Yes, they need a quarterback. Yes, they need a middle linebacker. Yes, they need a second wide receiver. Yes, they need another corner. There are plenty of positions that this team needs. Yes, they need probably a tight end as well. I think that you have your eye on the prize and you take the best guy there. Now, if there's a situation where there's a quarterback that you've fallen in love with and he's there at 8, 9, 10, and you're able to do a Patrick Mahomes type deal that the Chiefs did to move up and go get him, and you think that that's your guy, then go for it. Be aggressive. Attack success. We always say it, Yeah. But if you're sitting there at 19 and your quarterback isn't there and you don't want to give up the capital to move up and get the guy that you want, pick me the best player that's available, and I'm happy to roll with him. The good thing about the draft at that point is that you're going to know by that point kind of who you need and what spaces you need to fill. You're going to have gone through this free agency period, and you're going to be able to kind of figure out what's what. So I think in the next month and a half or so, we're going to have a much better idea of where their focus is going to be on the draft. But sticking at 19, pick the best player that's available, improve your team, and keep on going. There's nothing about this team that is good enough to target one particular position, and that's the one guy we're missing between us and a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I actually agree with that 100%, Mitch. I'm starting to feel like you and I are brothers here. Staying on the same topic, Rivera, Hurney, and Mayhew. How do you think this is going to mesh together during this process?
I hope
Polian too now. Yeah, Polian too now.
It seems like it should work well, because when you look at kind of the way that it's broken down, Hurney is going to be your administrative dude. Mayhew is going to be kind of your pro player personnel. Polian's going to be your college personnel guy. You kind of have a good delineation of guys with big title roles, but it's all under the Ron Rivera umbrella. So as long as there's not, infighting between that group, everything should go well. Now, if you go back and you look at the Rob Ryan and Greg Minuski defense, there were 4 different former head defensive coordinators that were on that defensive staff, and they all talked about how great it was going to be. We're going to fight each other to get up to the chalkboard to draw up our plays, and this is a lot of guys who have great knowledge who are going to put together a winning system. Well, Greg Minuski was never succeeded in doing that. Whether it was his personality wasn't strong enough, the personnel wasn't good enough, whatever you want to say it was, they had the same sort of conglomerate of guys who have a ton of experience and a ton of ideas and knowledge that were being put in a room and asked to come out with a diamond, and that diamond never came to fruition. Now, I believe that Ron is a much stronger personality and has much more control, and these guys are all much more mature and experienced than that group was, and I think that it will end up working out well. But there's certainly 2 sides to every coin. But bringing in guys with the experience levels that those guys have is never a bad thing, and certainly having people who have been there and done that. Another Ron Rivera saying, I don't want a guy who's drawing me a map. I want a guy who's been in there before. So I think that you look at the group that he's put together, and it's certainly a strong group on paper. Hopefully they perform in reality that well.
Awesome.
I love the group as well. I got one more for you. I want to talk about big men real quick. Brandon Sheriff. What would you like? Let me rephrase that. Are you for or against paying him 15, 16, 17 million a year?
I hope by the time that this podcast posts that this is a dated question, because they should extend him. They should re-sign him to top of the market money. He's your first all pro in 23, 24 years. He's the anchor of that offensive line. He's not just a guard, as a former head coach liked to say.
Yeah.
He's an integral part of that offensive line and that team, especially when you're talking about setting a tone and leading by example and all the things that he does. He's a great player, and he doesn't get the respect that I believe he deserves from this fan base, who is quibbling over whether he deserves 15 million or 10 million or whatever the number is. you got to pay. So at some point you got to pay your guys, and you can't keep cobbling together, mid-tier players who are getting paid. You gotta spend somewhere. Why aren't you going to spend on your homegrown guy? You know exactly what he is. The tenacity and leadership that he brings. He's the guy that you spend your money on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the sentiment from the fan base when, you read on Twitter is that apparently we can just get any kind of offensive lineman, they grow from trees, and I agree 100%. Let's take care of our homegrown, man. He wants to be here. Like you said, he's been big for us. So let's pay our guys is the way that I see it. Mitch, I got one.
Real quick, as far as offensive linemen grow, I think that Pro Football Focus is an incredible tool and a great tool to get an idea of, what's happening with individual players. But as far as offensive linemen go within a grading system, it's incredibly hard to truly evaluate those players without knowing what the system is that they're being asked to do. Right. And you see guys like Cornelius Lucas being graded super high, whereas Jaron Christian was rated lower because he was giving up sacks. Meanwhile, the quarterback, when Jaron Christian was in, was holding the ball and kind of running into a couple sacks, especially earlier in the season. So I think that there needs to be a step back between seeing these guys graded out at 97% and they aren't responsible for any sacks, this season and all these different things. Because while I think Cornelius Lucas filled in spectacularly, I don't know that I'm super excited about him being my full year starter at left tackle. I love the fact that he is as good as he is as a backup and potential swing tackle. And maybe he will play well as a full year starting left tackle, but I would feel much more comfortable bringing in somebody who I've seen do it over and over and over again, especially with some of the names that are going to be available this offseason.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely appreciate your takes on the offensive line. I think those are the forgotten guys, out there that, they're not the sexy, talk. So for you to put, a lot of, your research and knowledge and discussing these guys, it's much needed for, folks like myself and others that, don't really get into, deep and understand how offensive line works and how important these guys are, to the team. And Mitch, I got a last question for you. I'm just dying to know what you think. I know that you guys like to pick on Pete a little bit, and I tend to be on Pete's side. But if Pete was to challenge you to an arm wrestling match, but hold on though, I know you're shaking your head, but if he was able to use two hands during this match, who's winning?
I mean, if he's using two hands, he's probably winning. But
I'm surprised you gave him that.
Oh, wow, you gave him that.
I don't know there are many folks that are able to withstand a two-handed push in arm wrestling. But we love Pete. Let me be extremely clear. We love Pete. Yeah. It's fun giving him a hard time.
Yeah, y'all pick on him.
We all rag on each other.
Y'all are close. Y'all are pretty close.
Honestly, it's really fun to watch that because we see the family in you guys, and that's what we like. I mean, it's great to be professional and so on, but it's also nice to see a good banter side, of you. And you guys, really do a fantastic job out there. And I want to thank you for taking the time, giving up a little bit of time to help us out and just talk about something that we all love. So from me to you, man, thank you, Mitch. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. You talked about family, and we feel it in the NBC Sports Washington family with Pete and JP and all that.
Yeah.
But it's so fun for us to go and talk with the fans, especially in this weird COVID world where we haven't been able to have podcast parties or road trips or training camp when we get to, kind of hang out and see everybody and talk to everybody. It's so fun to have all these different outlets to catch up with people. And, what's fun for us is that we get in a media bubble from time to time where we're kicking around ideas with the other guys who are on the beat and know every, inch in detail about things. It's great to hear things from the other perspective and get a chance to talk to you guys. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we appreciate it. One more little thing. Was that hit that B Mitch gave Pete, did that look as hard in person? Did than it did on camera, because he knocked the snot out of him.
What's crazy about it is he knocked the snot out of him, and it was probably a 30% B Mitch hit.
Oh,
So I mean, B Mitch had a lot more in him, and kind of took it easy on him. When it first happened, we all kind of stopped and were like, because we thought he hit his head and maybe had a concussion or something. There was kind of a brief moment when we were like, oh boy. But Pete is a man who will do a lot of things for money, and taking a direct shot from B Mitch is apparently one of them. So
yeah,
good for him for doing it. And I love that, there were people on Twitter who were kind of taking shots at him, like, why did you juke? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And he was like, listen, when you're ready to stand in front of Brian Mitchell, one of the all-time best NFL, special teams players, and take a direct hit from him, you can come talk to me. Until then, take a seat.
Well, I appreciate the time. Mitch, why don't you go ahead and plug your handles and how people can listen to you and get a hold of you.
Yeah, just super easy on Instagram and Twitter, same handle at Mitch_Tischler. Feel free to follow along with everything we do. It's we got the Washington Football Talk podcast, which I assume your listeners probably know about, but if they don't, check it out. And thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks
awesome.
Thanks for coming on. Well, this is going to be it for the Bleeding Burgundy podcast. I am Jesse, your host, and that is Keith. You can catch me on Twitter at Jesse's24. Hit me up if you have a topic for the show, questions, just let us know, man. Hail to the team.
Cool, guys. That was fun. Thank you.